The gravity on Mars is just over 1/3 of Earth's, 38%, not too shabby. The air pressure is extremely low, surprisingly low, 0.6% of Earth's. And the temperature can reach up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the day and minus 100 degrees at night. So, not bad. So on Mars, you're looking at about 2 out of 3 of the variables. So the upsides of going to Mars is that, of course, it's not too far away, and it's relatively comfortable temperature-wise. But the thin atmosphere really is a problem, because it's thin enough to where it's not sustainable for life without some kind of engineering, but it's also thick enough that you still have to deal with that when landing. And that's why a lot of people, including Elon Musk, talk about terraforming Mars. Now there's a lot more details in Isaac's video, which I will post right here, but one of the things that you could do, that Elon Musk at least is talking about, is melting the polar ice caps on Mars. Because the polar ice caps on Mars are actually frozen CO2, so if you melt that and put it back into the atmosphere, that would thicken the atmosphere, increase greenhouse gases, and cause it to warm up a little bit. It is obviously much more complicated than that, but it is something that we would have to do if we ever really got serious about staying on Mars. So living on Mars would be pretty extreme, but not nearly as extreme as the next one on our list, Europa. Europa is a moon of Jupiter's. It has only 13% of the Earth's gravity, barely any air pressure, but what's there is mostly oxygen. And the temperature is really cold, negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit on average. Now that's a whole bunch of red buzzers, which sounds like this would be a swing and a miss, but there are some reasons that would be interesting to go there. Because the surface of Europa is ice, and underneath that ice is a liquid ocean. It's thought that tidal heating from the massive gravitational pull of Jupiter has warmed up the ice on the inside and has actually caused geysers to erupt, which have been spotted by Hubble. So many people think that Europa is one of the best opportunities to find life here in our solar system. In fact, some theoretical probes that NASA has played around with involve drills that would go through the ice and then swim through the ocean, kind of like a mechanical squid. So if it's warm enough underneath that ice, underwater habitats might be an option. We've seen that humans can survive underwater in things like submarines and underwater habitats here on Earth. That same technology might apply on Europa. One downside to Europa, however, is the fact that it is so close to Jupiter, and Jupiter's gravitational field, which is super massive, also carries with it and kind of funnels radiation from the sun, which bombards that planet. Might not be the best place to stay long term, but it's a compelling option. But even further out in our solar system, you find one of the most interesting moons out there, and that's Titan. Titan is a moon around Saturn. It's also about 13% of the gravity of Earth, so not too great there. But the pressure, the air pressure, is actually 1.5 times that of Earth. So it's actually livable air pressure. The temperature, however, not so much. It's negative 290 degrees Fahrenheit. Of all the places in our solar system, the air pressure on Titan is the closest to that here on Earth. It's so close that you could literally walk around without a suit on and be just fine. There is one problem. It's so cold that methane turns to liquid and flows in rivers on the surface. So yeah, you might want to wear a sweater. One great reason to go to Titan, however, is that all that methane and other components of the atmosphere would make great rocket fuel. But kind of like what we talked about with the moon, if we had a base on Titan, that could be a great refueling station before heading out into further reaches of the solar system. Or beyond. But I promised you something controversial, so here it is. My last and favorite option for colonizing another place in the solar system is Venus. Venus has the closest gravity to Earth at 91% of the Earth's gravity. The air pressure, however, is 100 times that of Earth, and the temperature is up to 872 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I know what you're thinking. This only meets one of the 3 criteria, so you're like, Joe, how could you possibly choose this as your number 1? Because those are numbers down the planet's surface. Up in the air, it's a different story. The density of Venus's atmosphere is insane. The air pressure at the surface would crush you like a soda can. But about 50 kilometers up in the clouds, it's about the same as here. Which means just like a ship can float on the top of the water, we could build colonies that would just float on the top of Venus's atmosphere. So then the gravity and the air pressure will be exactly what we're dealing with here on Earth. The temperature would still be high, but manageable. Now I know people will always say, but Joe, if you fell off of this structure, you would die. There's no way around that. And that's true, but again, let's go back to that ship analogy. If you're standing on the side of a cruise ship and you fall overboard, there's a really good chance you're gonna drown. If you drop your cell phone, you're never gonna see it again. Really not that much different than that. And we have cruise ships containing thousands of people and entire navies just floating around out there on the ocean. there's no reason why we couldn't do that on Venus as well. So you're actually getting 2 of the 3 criteria, plus the communication gap would be far shorter than anywhere else except for the moon. And because Venus is closer than everywhere else, it would be a lot shorter trip. So there you go, Venus for the win. Incontrovertible, there's no way that anything else could, what? Oh, the clouds are made of sulfuric acid? It just rains acid. So you would just be floating in acid. It also doesn't solve the problem of where we would go in a billion years when the sun expands. It would also eat up Mercury as well. But for me anyway, it meets most of the criteria better than any other place in the solar system. Feel free to argue in the comments. Let me know what you think. Alright, thanks to all of you for watching. If this is your first time here, I invite you to check out some of my other videos, and if you like those, please hit subscribe because I come back with videos just like this every Monday. Like this. And a real quick shout out to all my supporters, my answer files on Patreon who help support this channel and make it possible. I want to give a quick mention to the people who have signed up in the last week. We've got Christian Latanya Outrum, Andreas Reich, George Waters, and Mason Petrosky. I want to thank you guys for joining. If you guys would like to join, you can go to patreon.com/answerswithjoe, where you can get access to my private vlog that nobody else gets to see. And as always, this video is brought to you by cankerboy.com. You get regular mouth ulcers and canker sores. This is a once-a-day supplement that helps make those things go away. You don't have to live with the pain. Go check it out. Cankerboy.com. You get a risk-free trial. And last but not least, just again, I want to encourage you to go check out the podcast with Isaac Arthur. I will put the link down in the description below once it's ready. And I want to thank Isaac for doing that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thank you guys again for watching. Go out there and have an eye-opening week. And I'll see you next Monday. Love you guys. Take care. There's a small island off the coast of Florida that's home to a tiny green lizard called the green anole, or Carolina anole. Actually, they're not just on that island in Florida. I see them in my backyard all the time here in Texas, but something happened on this particular island that got the attention of biologists all around the world. And what happened was an invasion of a different type of anole called the brown anole, or the Cuban anole. Insert your favorite Cuban immigrant joke here. You racist piece of shit. What happened that was so interesting was that these two species started battling it out for resources, which caused the green anoles to move up higher in the trees for food and to mate and stuff like that. And this had an interesting effect, because the smaller, younger branches at the top of the tree are smoother than the trunks and limbs and barkier areas of the tree down below. The lizards that had the larger foot pads had a better grip, meaning they could eat more and reproduce more. And in only 15 years, these green anoles on this Florida island changed. Their feet are now 10% bigger than the lizards that I see in my backyard. Evolution is a long-term process. It takes place over hundreds of thousands and millions of years. But sometimes a drastic change in environmental factors can trigger rapid evolution, like we're seeing with our little green friends. I've talked previously about all the challenges involved in getting to and living in the harsh environment of Mars. But let's just say we beat the odds and we actually set up a permanent human presence there. How would that change us? And how long would it take? How exactly will Earthlings become Martians? Anatomically modern humans have been around for about 200,000 years or so, and we really haven't changed that much in that time, but there are some regional differences that have come up in response to environmental factors. In fact, that's all race is. A set of genetic mutations that gave advantages in certain environmental conditions. People from Africa, for example, where the sun beats down like an angry god, developed thicker hair and darker skin because people with thicker hair and darker skin survived longer and reproduced more, and collected more vibranium. Populations in Europe and the Nordic regions, where they got very little sun, developed lily white skin because they were able to absorb more of the sun's rays and produce more vitamin D. And hammers. There are examples of these kinds of adaptations all over the world. People who live in really high altitude regions like the Tibetan Plateau and the Andes Mountains were able to develop genetic mutations that allowed them to live in a low pressure, low oxygen environment, conditions that would leave the rest of us, gasping for air in the fetal position. It's thought that it's a mutation in their hemoglobin expression that makes this possible. On the flip side, you have the Bajau people of Southeast Asia. They're also known as the sea nomads, and they've been using free diving as a way to secure food and trade for thousands of years. It's estimated that the average Bajauan spends 60% of their time in the water, and they can hold their breath for up to 13 minutes. That, by the way, is insane. 13 minutes is probably about as long as this video is going to be, so just start holding your breath now. See if you can make it to the end. Go ahead. Try it. And studies have shown that the Bajau people have spleens that are 50% larger than populations in the surrounding area. The reason that matters is there's a thing called the spleen squeeze that's part of our dive reflex. Basically, it squeezes oxygenated blood into the rest of our system. The bigger the spleen, the more oxygenated blood, the longer you can stay underwater. The dive reflex is actually kind of fascinating. It's this thing that we all do, which has led some evolutionary biologists to assume that maybe there was an aquatic phase of our early evolution. They call it the aquatic ape theory. So yeah, while human evolution takes place over millions of years, adaptations can occur fairly quickly in extreme conditions. But no extreme condition on Earth comes anywhere close to the extreme conditions on Mars. Now there are dozens of factors that we need to adjust if we were to live on Mars, but we're going to focus here on 4 of them. Low gravity, high solar radiation and cosmic rays, no bacterial life, and low air pressure. Low gravity is the biggie. Mars's gravity is 1/3 that of Earth, and all evolution that we know of, human or animal, has taken place in Earth gravity, so this is a bit of a wild card. It's assumed that the low gravity would lead to bone density loss like we see in astronauts on the ISS. Astronauts in a microgravity environment actually lose 1 to 2% of their bone density every month. There's actually a name for this. It's called spaceflight osteopenia. While this bone loss wouldn't be as bad on Mars because there is some gravity there, some speculate that this would favor people with thicker bone density and higher bone mass because they would be able to lose more of it throughout their lives without, getting broken all the time. And this includes the cranium, meaning our heads are going to get bigger. On the other hand, lower gravity means that our hearts wouldn't have to work as hard to pump blood throughout our body. This could actually lead to weak hearts and maybe even cardiovascular issues, so some think that we may actually grow much taller to compensate for that. So perhaps over time, Martians will grow both stockier and taller. Now, one thing's for sure, while an Earth person might really enjoy going to Mars and enjoying that light gravity, somebody that's acclimated to Mars would be miserable on Earth. Imagine going on a vacation and carrying 3 times your body weight the whole time. Now on to solar radiation. Mars does not have a magnetic shield like we do and a very thin atmosphere, so people on Mars are going to be dealing with significantly higher amounts of radiation than we do here on Earth. Overall, this would accelerate the number of genetic mutations, which could lead to more cancer, so probably people with better DNA repair processes at the cellular level would have the advantage. And just like the people in Africa grew darker skin in response to more solar radiation, people on Mars might grow darker skin as well. Dark skin, of course, comes from the pigment melanin, but some people speculate that maybe melanin won't be strong enough to protect from both the solar radiation and the cosmic rays that you would be seeing on Mars, and they expect that maybe we would evolve to use carotenoids, which would give us a dark orange hue. Now, ironically, Mars is further from the sun than Earth, which means it's actually going to be a little bit darker there. They say that the best day on Mars is about as bright as a very cloudy day here on Earth, so it might be expected that our eyes would grow bigger just like nocturnal animals. Now, here on Earth, we live in a soup of microbial life, some of which are constantly trying to kill us, some of which we couldn't live without. Mars would have none of that. This might lead over time to changes in our digestive system because we rely so much on our gut microbiome for that, but the immediate effect would be on our immune systems. Without exposure to the sea of microbes that we're swimming in every day, an isolated population quickly loses resistance to those microbes. And don't kid yourself, people on Mars are going to be isolated AF. Just look at what happened to the First Nations people here in the Americas when the Europeans came over. 90% of that population was wiped out by smallpox, flu, and the measles. And they live on the same planet. Plus, as I mentioned in a previous video, concentrations of perchlorates in the Martian soil could mess with our thyroid and affect our immune systems even further. Now, this isn't meant to say that humans on Mars are going to be like the boy in the bubble, although they kind of will be. They'll have a resistance to their own microbes. It'll be evolving over time as well. But what this will do is further isolate the Martian populations from the Earthlings because contact with them will be incredibly dangerous, and maybe eventually it will even become banned, just like we now ban, reaching out to uncontacted tribes in the Amazon or on North Sentinel Island because contact with our germs could wipe out their populations. Less contact means less opportunity for interbreeding, which would just accelerate speciation. You might see something of an exponential S-curve going on there. And last but not least is the low air pressure on Mars. As I was talking earlier about the Tibetans and the Andean mountain people, the low pressure, low oxygen environment of Mars might require them to increase their hemoglobin production at a cellular level, but it also might increase their lung capacity, leading to large chests and rib cages. A trend toward bigger heads and bigger rib cages could lead to more difficult pregnancy and childbirth, which means that there might be a trend toward wider pelvic regions, especially with women. So what could a human look like if evolved from Mars? Dark orange skin, tall, stocky, large eyes, wide-hipped, with pronounced heads and large chests. Now this is all just speculation based on how we would expect the human body to react over time to the specific conditions of Mars. This is not factoring in the intervention of technology. Now obviously C-sections can make childbirth a lot easier, so that might not be as much of a factor. Genetic engineering might make it so that we could live off of lower oxygen, low pressure environments a lot better. And by the time we have a colony on Mars, diseases might be a thing of the past, meaning interbreeding amongst Earthlings and Martians would be more likely. So there's a lot of variables that we can't know right now. But how long would this take? Well, the first step to answering that question is to consider that everything that I just said is bullshit. Kind of. Because half of those conditions I just talked about, we're not going to be exposed to them when we get to Mars. Not for a very, very long time. Living on Mars is not going to be that much more different than if we were living on the moon. Mars only has 1% of the atmosphere that we have here. No amount of genetic mutation is going to make it possible to breathe that. The first colonies on Mars are going to be living completely underground or in interconnected mazes of habitats on the surface of Mars. All of these adaptations I'm talking about would never even occur until we terraformed Mars. And that is going to take a while. If it's possible at all. We're talking around 100,000 years or so. And this would, of course, mean thickening the atmosphere by melting the polar ice caps either with giant mirrors or with nukes, and it would involve putting up some kind of solar shield between the sun and the Mars at the L1 Lagrange point to keep the solar radiation from stripping away the atmosphere. That's a whole different video. But let's just say that we're able to pull that off. By the time we get that done, people will have been living in enclosed dwellings and underground on the red planet for hundreds of generations. So human evolution would go down a very different path at first, that might trend towards smaller people because they use less resources and take up less space in an enclosed environment. Their skin might be super pale because they're never at all exposed to solar radiation. By the way, you're still holding your breath, right? So you could say there are three eras of Mars habitation: colonization, evolution, and speciation. Colonization until the planet can become terraformed, evolution as we adapt to this new environment there on Mars, and then speciation, a whole new species. Homo Martius? But long before Martians become their own species, they're going to be a different race from us, one that looks completely different than we do, one with different cultural traditions, cultural norms, different shared history, different language maybe even, completely distinct from ours. What would that look like? It's not hard to imagine tribalism kicking in. Maybe even a certain level of animosity springing up toward the Martians, especially if there's a downturn in the Earth's economy, because we're still going to be spending vast resources trying to keep up the Mars colonies for a very long time. Eventually the Martian colonies will become self-sustaining though, and when that happens, will they even want anything to do with us? It would be physically exhausting, maybe even deadly, for them to come to visit us and interact with us and our germs. After a while, they may cut us off completely. Earth might just become a part of their mythology, a thing that they tell their kids, the place that they all came from way, way back in the day. Maybe there'll be a collapse of civilization here on Earth or an extinction level event, and they'll forget about us completely. The reason we want to colonize Mars and the solar system and beyond is so that if something were to happen here on Earth, our species would survive. And it's a good reason to do that. The irony is, it won't be us that survives. It'll be a completely different species. One that's adapted to and calls home a completely different world, maybe one of many species on many different worlds. They may not know who we are. They may not remember us at all. To them, Earth would be the cave of our ancestors, a place where we painted our dreams on the walls and struggled against the unknown so that someday they could have their place in a much bigger universe.